They switched to Russian the way people do when they believe language can protect them from consequences. Like understanding is something you can simply exclude from the room. Jake had always done it with his mother, slipping into conversations he assumed I couldn't follow, creating a version of reality where I didn't exist. I never corrected him. Not because I couldn't, but because there was never a reason to. Russian wasn't something I learned casually. It was something I picked up when understanding mattered more than being included, when listening was more valuable than being acknowledged. And that night, it mattered more than anything. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing plates, half listening until his voice shifted into something sharper, more precise. Она уже на 8-й неделе. 8 weeks. My hands didn't stop. I didn't react. Then came the part that changed everything. His mother asked if I knew. He answered immediately. Controlled. Certain. Она никогда не узнает. She'll never find out. That was the moment the situation stopped being emotional and started becoming structural. Because once you understand something that was never meant for you, you don't break. You reposition. I finished what I was doing, dried my hands, and walked back into the room with the same expression I had always worn. A neutral, predictable, safe. His mother studied my face carefully, searching for a reaction that would confirm her suspicion. But I gave her nothing. Jake smiled at me, relaxed, unaware that the version of me he thought he understood had already been replaced. That was the mistake. Not the betrayal. The assumption. Because the moment someone decides you're not a threat, they stop preparing. And when they stop preparing, they make it easy to prove them wrong. I didn't confront him. That would have turned everything into an argument. And arguments rely on emotion. I wasn't interested in emotion anymore. I was interested in outcomes. So instead of reacting, I started documenting quietly, methodically, the way you build a case that doesn't need interpretation. Every detail mattered once I stopped assuming anything was accidental. The way Jake angled his phone slightly away from me, the messages he responded to faster than the others, the new routines that didn't align with the life he claimed to be living. None of it was obvious on its own. But patterns don't rely on single moments. They rely on repetition. And repetition is where people expose themselves. When my best friend showed up at my door one afternoon, crying, telling me she was pregnant, I already knew. Not because she told me, but because I had heard the number weeks earlier. 8 weeks. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't question her. I played my role exactly the way they expected me to. Concerned. Supportive. Present. I asked questions that made sense and avoided the ones that would reveal what I already understood. She called the situation complicated. I didn't challenge it. Complicated is just another word for hidden when people are trying to control the narrative. That night, I told Jake what she had said and watched him carefully. His expression didn't change, but his body did. A delay just slightly too long. A breath that didn't match the moment. That was enough. Because confirmation doesn't come from what people say. It comes from what they fail to control when they think they're safe. And by then, they both thought they were completely safe. If you had enough evidence to prove a betrayal like this, would you confront them right away? Or stay silent until you could win completely? Comment your strategy. Once I had confirmation, I stopped observing and started building something that could stand on its own without me. Information only matters when it's structured. And I wasn't interested in suspicion anymore. I wanted proof that didn't rely on interpretation. I installed a monitoring application on his phone while he was in the shower. Something discreet enough to avoid detection, but precise enough to capture everything he thought he had hidden. Messages. Call logs. Deleted conversations restored through backups. At the same time, I hired a private investigator. Not because I needed validation, but because independent verification carries weight in ways personal knowledge never will. Over the next few weeks, everything aligned. Locations that didn't match his explanations. Transactions that traced back to places he never mentioned. Conversations that started cautious and became careless as they grew more confident. She has no idea. They repeated that more than once. That was the mistake. Confidence reduces discipline. And once discipline is gone, patterns become evidence. I documented everything the way it would be presented in court. Chronological. Clean. Cross-referenced. Every detail supported by something external. Something that couldn't be dismissed as assumption. By the time I finished organizing it, I wasn't discovering anything anymore. I was preparing an outcome. Because the difference between knowing the truth and proving it is the difference between losing and winning. And I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in being undeniable. By then, the case wasn't something I was building in reaction to them. It was something that existed independently of them. And when something reaches that point, the result is no longer a question. It's just a matter of timing. By the time the evidence was complete, I didn't rush to use it. Timing matters more than truth when outcomes are involved. Instead of confronting them, I let the situation continue just long enough for them to become comfortable again. That was the pattern I relied on. People reveal the most when they believe nothing is at risk. I suggested we all spend more time together. Small gatherings, casual dinners, shared spaces where they could relax without thinking about consequences. Jake agreed too easily. She did too. That was the first confirmation that they still believed they were in control. During those moments, I didn't look for proof anymore. I observed behavior. The way their attention shifted without intention. The pauses in conversation when they realized they had said too much. The subtle adjustments people make when they're trying not to be noticed. And how often those adjustments fail. Every interaction reinforced what I had already documented. Not because I needed more evidence, but because consistency removes doubt. At the same time, I finalized everything legally. Filed the initial paperwork. Structured the case so that once it was presented, there would be no space for reinterpretation. Jake started to sense something before it was too late. Not because he understood what I had, but because control had started to shift in a way he couldn't measure. He asked more questions, watched me more carefully, tried to reestablish patterns that no longer existed. But control doesn't return once it's been removed from the foundation. It only becomes more obvious when someone tries to force it back. And by then, everything he thought he was managing had already moved beyond him. The situation wasn't building toward confrontation anymore. It was building toward exposure. And unlike confrontation, exposure doesn't require participation. It only requires presence. The courtroom was quieter than people expect when everything is about to fall apart. There was no tension in the way movies portray it. No raised voices. No visible hostility. Just structure. Order. And a sequence of facts waiting to be placed where they belonged. I didn't look at Jake when the hearing began. I didn't need to. By that point, this wasn't about him as a person. It was about the position he had created for himself within the evidence. My attorney moved through everything methodically, establishing the timeline first. Dates. Locations. Overlapping records that didn't align with his statements. Then came the messages. Selected. Precisi. Impossible to reinterpret once read in sequence. The tone in the room shifted slightly. Not emotionally, but in attention. That was when the cross-examination began. Jake was asked simple questions. The kind that don't feel dangerous until you realize every answer closes off another option. Where he had been, who he had been with, why certain transactions existed. His responses were controlled at first. Careful. Measured. But consistency is difficult to maintain when the structure isn't yours. The pauses became longer. The corrections more frequent. Then came the moment that removed everything else. The DNA results. Introduced without emphasis. Just another piece of evidence. But final. Irrefutable. His composure didn't break dramatically. It fractured in small, visible ways. The inability to answer directly. The shift in posture. The loss of rhythm in his speech. My former best friend didn't speak at all. She didn't need to. The evidence had already spoken for her. The judge didn't react emotionally. That wasn't the role. But the direction of the case was clear before it was stated. Because once every piece aligns, there's nothing left to argue, only outcomes to confirm. As I reached the door, I paused. Not because I needed to, but because there was one part of the truth I had never shared. Not in the evidence. Not in the courtroom. Not even with my attorney. I turned back slightly, just enough for my voice to carry without raising it. There's one thing I didn't include, I said. Jake looked up immediately. Confusion, cutting through what was left of his composure. The room stilled again. Not because it had to, but because people always listen when something unfinished is about to be resolved. I met his eyes for the first time since the hearing began. That wasn't the first time I heard you speaking Russian. The silence that followed felt different. Sharper. I let it sit for a second before continuing. I understood you long before that night. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but in a way that couldn't be hidden. Because now, the timeline he thought he understood no longer existed. I just needed to know how far you would go if you thought I never would. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. Because that was the part that mattered. Not the betrayal. Not even the outcome. The fact that everything he had done, every decision, every lie, every risk he took, had happened under the assumption that I was never a factor. And that assumption had been wrong from the very beginning. I turned and walked out without looking back. Because the case had ended in court, but the truth had ended him long before that. So be honest, is she the victim or the most calculated person in this story? And would you have played the same game until the end? Drop your answer below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.